And I use this opportunity not to necessarily explain anything because all of you are great achievers on your own. Um, this is something that I've noticed about how we think about buildings, how we've been taught to think about buildings, and the act of building itself and why we are doing what we're doing. And I've realized that there is a question of proximity, distance, and intimacy that I'd like to think about through this talk. So that's why I've called it different strokes for different folks. So you can take away what you will. So let's start with the big boy. So Mies is famous for making these absolute statements on architecture. One thing he'd said a long time back, like in the 60s, is architecture starts when you carefully put two bricks together. And somehow in architecture school, in offices, in studios, architects tend to imagine bricks, I guess, in their drawings as two parallel lines. Uh, we realized almost as soon as we started. So the building that you see on the extreme right is the first building Weber and I completed. And the building you see on your left, Shanti Sthan, is, I mean, I literally handed this project over yesterday before coming. So when someone thinks about bricks and the act of building, it needs to not just be about care. You need to imagine the brick as not something that is structural, that is necessarily blocking something as opaque, but with a little bit of effort, you can make bricks do completely transformational things, including be veils, screens, look at things of solidity, opaqueness, transparency, all at the same time. And the humility with which a masonry happens is something that we tend to forget when we start designing larger and larger projects. But literally the story of diversity, of this question of intimacy, privacy, publicness, for us comes together with this act of carefully putting bricks together. Sorry. Moving on, another stalwart. Ayn Rand, all of us, I think, those of us who studied at least until the 90s have been told that, you know, this is what an architect's job is. You have to civilize people. You have to think about things that are larger than buildings, larger than people. We all suffer a little bit from a Jesus Christ complex. And this lady kind of epitomized that. Civilization is the progress towards a society of privacy. Now, I don't know, living in New York is a different thing, but living in India, that sounds almost absurd. And this question of privacy is also a question of privilege. In India, privacy is not something everyone can afford. The question for us in India is actually comes down to how one thinks about our homes. So these are three projects that we looked at three different stages in our practice. And each of them has a different way of addressing built volume, open space, privacy, publicness, and finally building a house that very often people here spend their whole lives imagining what that house will be like. So how does it then represent the people who are resident in the house? So I'll start with the first one. Cleft is a house for a sort of a familiar situation here, which is a family, which is a joint family, but it's not a very large family, but there are many generations. This question within the house of how do you handle this diversity often leads to very, very complicated ways of thinking about a home. So we thought, like, if we were to look at it volumetrically, and if you could take a monolithic volume and just break it apart, and hence the name Cleft. What we found was, as we progressed discussing this with the client family, we were getting closer and closer to the sort of older way of building a house, which is a large family home arranged around a courtyard. So in all our reinventions and re-looking at prototypes and typologies, somehow the circle keeps coming back to ways that resonate with us culturally. So Cleft was an extremely contemporary house, but literally it's like a traditional Indian courtyard house where multiple generations live in different places, they call out to each other, and that courtyard is not a null space, it's actually the heart of the house. On the other hand, we did this project in Gurgaon where, again, the thing that one really is looking for is green space. And Gurgaon being Gurgaon, the idea is that once you have green space, you keep it to yourself, don't share it. But in this project, the idea was how do you define a large space that is green, that is open. A client, actually a young family, wanted to play football in their house. And in a place like Gurgaon, to think about this, we told them you need to give up a little bit of built area, which they were okay with. But the idea of dividing the volume in a different way in order to achieve different sort of relationships between private and public, you'll notice that the ground floor completely opens up to this lawn, but the first floor has these very discrete windows, and this is essentially in order to maintain the privacy of the rooms from the neighbors' houses. It's a very simple form, almost childlike, so we thought, why not think about something different in terms of the material, and we decided to do it in poured red concrete, just to kind of make it stand out in a crowd in Gurgaon. In Delhi, the tradition of living in a barsati, sharing your home with your neighbors is sort of something that we've forgotten about. We got an opportunity to design this home for an artist in an artist colony, where it was clear that the neighbors were all very similar. But yet, again and again, we find we are asked to design homes that are little fortified. They're like little fortresses that people build for themselves. Anita, our client here, said that she wanted to have a home in which people could see her make art. And then we started thinking about the volume of this house, not in plans as we traditionally do, but in section. And what we realized was that if you were to have this volume wrap around itself in section, you'd actually get these very, very nice views, long slit-like windows. So you can actually see the resident of the house going from floor to floor, working in her home, or working in the residential part, coming down to the studio. And the armature against which this whole house opens up is also in many ways a canvas with which the artist can express herself to her neighbors, to her surroundings. So again, my point is, when we talk about diversity, for me, the question in a home is actually the diversity of our conceptions of privacy. How public or private are we when we think of our homes? And that has its ramifications on society. Okay, we work now move closer in time. Jean Nouvel, French, so says very dramatic things. One of the dramatic things he said, the future of architecture is not architectural. Studying architecture, hearing someone like him say this was a little depressing. And you're like, then why am I here? What am I studying so hard for? But of late, we've come to realize that there can be a lot of truth in what he said. We recently started a studio in Goa. What we are beginning to do now is actually design boats. So my father was a naval architect, and for the longest time, he used to diss me saying that, you know, it's okay, architecture is fine, but naval architecture is something else because my stuff has to float. So, in fact, the second boat, I used him as a consultant. A lot of what we build, we ourselves have an impression that it is going to last forever. The materials we build with are also similarly designed to last for hundreds of years. But with climate change, with the way society is moving, with the way technology is moving, that sense of immortality, that sense of permanence, I think does a lot of disservice to architecture when we stand here today. So I'll take you to just briefly through this project, which is a pavilion for the Kochi Biennale in 2018. The challenge is very interesting that every 2 years something gets built here for precisely 3 months, and then it's removed. So one can talk about the waste that that creates. But I was actually more interested in what happens when the building is no longer there. Kerala, being the kind of place it is an eruption of foliage, and it completely take over by the natural plants that grow in the place. So our idea was to try and marry these two disparate technologies of bamboo craft and steel in this pavilion. Like I said, I won't dwell on this because my timer's gone off. But I feel that this idea that we have of dropping anchor and anchoring something through a foundation to the ground is also something we can revisit in our understanding of diversity and difference in our work. So we're beginning to do this. These are two initial projects that we've done. Weber and I met in college. One of the things that we really bonded on was theater. That's us actually fighting a deadline on the extreme right. Both of us are extremely different personalities. I am a lot more hairy than Weber, but for the longest time, for the past 25 years, in the first 20 years, we thought that was enough diversity. We were just such two polar opposites that that was all we needed to create the magic of studio. In the past 5 or 6 years, perhaps with age, um, or maturity, as they say, we've realized that that's not just good enough. So about 5 years back, we decided to broaden the leadership in our firm, and we now have Shruti and Khyati join us in running this firm, which is now becoming bigger. Uh, we are growing older, so the studio seems younger. Often when they speak, I can't understand what they're saying. So we need interpreters in this world of diversity. So I hope this carries on and we get more and more people able to understand how we've understood what we've been doing for the past 25 years. Yeah, so this is something serious. So 25 years is a bit of a landmark, and it really makes you think about what is happening around you. And in these past 25 years, I feel that this is what has happened around us. We've become post-globalized, we are hyper-connected, and we are climate changed. These are all very scary, scary things to look forward to. So for that, I just have this one piece of advice, you can say. What we will need is much less ideology, much more real politic, much more practical understanding of human relationships. We are all communicating in silos. We need to distribute our communications and talk to different types of people. Uh, architects tend to like to talk to architects. We should try talking to people who are also not architects. And my understanding of climate change is that we need some form of resilience that drops anchors. It's not the buildings that need to drop anchors. Our sense of resilience or bouncing back needs to drop anchors. And for that, in architecture, I feel that these are two things that architects should consider for their future. One is design for impermanence, and the other is to build to conserve. That's it. Thank you.